It's a real pleasure to be here and talk to you folks. I recognize that this is the largest group who's ever showed up. This is almost twice, I think, the size of any previous group that's come to Washington to inaugurate. I've had the opportunity over the course of my career to have visited many countries that CARE has been involved in. I've seen CARE trucks all over the place in the world. I started out in Africa in 1961 with something called Operation Crossroads. And I tell young people today that the first thing you should do is learn a language, and the second thing you should do is go and visit a third world country. Get out of the five-star hotel, live like the people, and I ate Canadian village food for 6 weeks, and you figure out what it's like for 90% of the people on the face of the earth who are living on a couple of dollars a day at best. And that's why CARE is really such an important organization in that they are dealing with the poorest of the poor around the world. There are 550 million people living in sub-Saharan Africa who live on less than $2 a day. When I was based in Kinshasa at the embassy, and I had 26 embassies south of there. I had everything from Gabon to Somalia to the Republic of South Africa. And I saw Africa in all of its problems on top of the fact that the AIDS epidemic had broken out. I was there in '87 when the AIDS epidemic was just taking off. And as many of you know, in the treatment of AIDS, it's great to have the drugs and to have the CTs and all the counters and all this stuff. But if people don't have food, they can't take the medicine. You can't take the antiretrovirals on an empty stomach, and it becomes very important, the distribution of food and dealing with it. And so the part that has been played by CARE in that whole thing is very important. Now, I'm also one who believes that development is really what Africa's always needed. After I saw Africa and traveled 80,000 miles in 7 months when I was with the State Department, it was very clear to me that when I came to Congress, we ought to do something about African trade. Rather than just handing people fish, we ought to teach them how to fish, so to speak. And basically, my staff guy and I sat down and wrote the African Growth and Opportunity Act, which is really the first time the Americans ever had a trade policy toward Africa. It seems hard to believe that when I started in 1995 with this whole issue, the State Department didn't have anybody who was looking at the development of the economy in Africa. Treasury didn't have anybody. The USTR didn't. Congress didn't. There was nobody in the federal government thinking about trade policy. So today is the anniversary. We had earlier today, we had the 10th celebration of the beginning of AGOA, which is really the Trade Act and its efforts to begin to give Africans a way to get themselves out of the grinding poverty that is everywhere on the continent. And I think that it is in my view, organizations like CARE that have kept people alive to bring them to the point where I think today we now have an opportunity, since we have the ability to deal with the AIDS epidemic with antiretrovirals, but we also have a way for them to develop economically if we continue to push. What's interesting is that at the time when we have the biggest downturn in our personal economy, probably since the 1930s, CARE's representation in Washington, D.C. is double what it would be in an ordinary year. So you're all to be commended for not saying, gee, it's hopeless, we got to think about ourselves, but are willing to think about the world. And I think that as we look into the future, it is really a time when we are going to have a more important role than we've ever had. As we struggle with energy, and we're talking about biofuels, and where should you put a corn decisions in this country to make around the whole question of how we take care of the world's needs. And so I'm very pleased to come here and accept and acknowledge what you folks have done and what you're continuing to do. I know you're all volunteers, with the exception of Helene and a couple of people I met at the front door. But volunteers are what make things happen. People like Helene can be wonderful and smart,